Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today we're going to tip the scales of justice. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and the man rumoured to be playing the crackpot Winston in the remake of Orwell's 1984, Martin McMahon.
1983, we were there first.
More importantly, and much more Orwellingly, if that's a word, we're delighted to be joined in the Tortoise Shack by Solidarity TD for Dublin South West and member of the Socialist Party. I think he was described as Ireland's most dangerous man by Shane Coleman on News Talk, which I kind of thought was a badge of honour. Mr. Paul Murphy. Paul, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
I'm delighted to be on. Thanks for having me.
Now, I just want to assure listeners, first and foremost, that even though myself and Martin are sitting either side of you, you're free to go whenever you want, okay?
It's a very small room. It's the illusion of freedom.
Yeah. No, Paul, cheers for coming on, buddy. It's great to meet you. When I say that actual about Ireland's most dangerous, it was actually, there was that sentence. It was used, I think, on the old Sunday show they used to do on News Talk, and it was one of these Terry Prone moments where they were talking about who are the most dangerous people, and it was yourself and Corbyn. And I thought to myself, so Corbyn the pacifist, and you because you had a megaphone, I think maybe it was a weapon of mass destruction.
The other person who was described as the most dangerous man in Ireland was Dave Murphy, who was our social media person during the trial. And the Phoenix described him as the media thinks he's the most dangerous man in Ireland because he's threatened. The whole jury system is falling down because we were having social media reporting from the trial as opposed to people relying on the gatekeepers of mainstream media. Which actually
brings us to one of my very first points I've written down when I want to talk about this, is the actual fact of how the media is, people believe what the media tell them is one of the most frequent things you hear. And yet the narrative was controlled from the outset that, your face didn't fit, Paul. You guys were deemed guilty even after found innocent. I believe the Taoiseach stood up and said that just because you were found innocent didn't mean that you didn't do anything wrong. That actually worries me in a real democracy. You can't speak against the judiciary like that. That's they talk about people prejudicing themselves. Well, that's just blatant prejudice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the establishment, broadly defined, the economic establishment, the likes of your Dennis O'Brien, the political establishment, and the media establishment, just couldn't take it. They just couldn't take, like, the water charges as an overarching thing of working class people getting organised in communities and beating them through mass civil disobedience and forcing effective abolition of water charges as they were. And then Jobstown is like the icing on the cake for that. Because for them, Jobstown epitomised all their fears of the quote-unquote mob. People who are expected to be quiet, not to vote, not to be engaged politically, being engaged in a substantial way, as happened across the state, and expressing their power, which resulted in a delay of one of their figures for 2.5 hours. And then, as they see it, for us to quote-unquote get away with it was just too much to bear for them. And therefore their logic was, well, okay, maybe you weren't guilty of false imprisonment, but you were sure as hell guilty of something. You couldn't be guilty of nothing.
I get this on, because I'm quite adamant that we shouldn't be paying extra water charges. And I'm quite adamant that why should I pay, we'll say 1/30th of my income for a shower when Leo Varadkar only has to pay 1/3000 of his income for a shower. That's not fair, no matter what way you cut it.
I can come in there as well, more importantly, and this is what always comes into the conversation. If I pay, let's say, 10 cents for a litre, and if I'm a multinational, I can be paying 1 cent for a litre. They get the effective tax break on the back of it's a study that came out recently that showed in the last decade, tax paid by multinationals globally is down 6% and tax paid by individuals is up 8%. So what is actually happening by the likes of creating a market where there was no market, I always go on about rent seeking, and this is the fact that this is another attempt to create a market that wasn't there, is about hollowing out working class and actual, PAYE or whatever level of socio-economic class you want to talk about. It's hollowing them out at the discounting of the higher ups.
You were at the RDS when Naomi Klein was there? Did you see Naomi Klein? No. It was a very, what I'll call is affluent Labour set that had turned up to see her. Yeah. Okay, and I was there,
Uh-huh.
and they asked Naomi Klein about the water charges.
Yes, and they were shocked when she said she was against the water charges.
She said,
supported
I'm
the movement.
completely against the water charges.
Yeah.
They got so upset.
Yeah.
These were,
Yeah.
one woman, I never read what you write again. And I'm like, and would she explain it? She said, look, the multinationals are getting tax breaks.
Yeah.
So they need to tax somebody. So they're taxing the individual so that they can let the multinational away with it. But they so didn't like the message.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line. All these people stupidly saying, oh yeah, water charges, force water charges. All you're saying is, let's not tax multinationals.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just water. Water was just the commodity, like Bitcoin is the commodity. It was a household charge, and they needed to hammer it to something. So they hammered it to water. Now they're trying the same with broadband. They're trying to hammer one, and it's just household charges. That's all they're trying to put forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely linked to what you're saying about the decline in corporate tax rates globally over the past, whole number of decades since the onset of neoliberalism. It's come down and down and down and down.
It's lower. It's even more vast if you take a 20-year window. I'm just referring to the most recent report. It was a 10-year one that showed that in the face of the big global financial crisis,
That's right.
they paid less and individuals paid more. That just should jump off the page at anybody who's interested in a fairer society or even tackling inequality. Where do you start? You start there.
Profits in Ireland for all corporations in 2010 was 50 billion. Now it's over 100 billion. And wages are effectively the same now as they were then, despite rents being completely out of control. So all of this is about a transfer of wealth, and the fact it's going back to Naomi Klein. It's the shock doctrine, is using a crisis which was caused by their system of neoliberal capitalism to actually go further and to embed it in law with the fiscal treaty, to embed it in terms of taxation policy by imposing things like water charges. But it's, again, to go back to like your affluent Labour supporter who's shocked by Naomi Klein, they want to deal with this stuff. Like, they want to abstract water charges from the reality of a capitalist class society that we have and a class war that exists between the 1% and the 99% over the control of wealth. And they want to suggest somehow that if you have water charges, then you will have more investment in water infrastructure. And it doesn't hold up to any rational analysis. You can raise money however you like, and then you can spend it however you like. They're two different policy decisions to make. So Cathy Sheridan had an article in the Irish Times last week, which could have been written 3 or 4 years ago with the water charges, saying, this is our Brexit moment. This is, because we don't have water charges. If we only had water charges now. Sunday Business Post had the same with the weekend, an editorial. If only we had water charges, we wouldn't have the infrastructure crisis.
Who was what's the guy in Malahide? He only said it yesterday. If there was water charges, we wouldn't have had these leaks. And you're looking at him, you go.
There was, I think it was Jennifer Bray in the Times I think it was a tweet she put up, and she said 3 years in California, some of the most severe droughts of the last 100 years. Not one day was the water turned off. 3 days of snow, and we're told that we all need to have water restrictions in the wettest country in the world.
Yeah,
and if, just even on a purely factual basis, if water charges had been imposed, Irish Water didn't plan to invest any more in infrastructure than they do now. They're still operating on the same plan. They had their investment plan at the same time they were imposing water charges. So the situation would clearly be like exactly the same. Or in Britain, where they have water charges, they have water shortages at the moment as well. So it's just, it's a nonsense. It doesn't hold up, but it's perceived wisdom.
There's a sheepishness to those who are pushing this side. It's like, water charges, we've been told that that'll help. So therefore we won't look at any of the facts. We'll just keep and there's nobody looking into behind the scenes and saying, well, it's your natural resource and you're going to flog it off. Oh, come on, lads, cop on. But there's this blind spot. They will not get past it.
We need to taking water, like, we can talk all day for water, because we really could, but there's no point in doing it, because as far as we're concerned, we were all in agreement here that was just the focal point, the central point, and what actually happened. And what happened the last few days was people who were sore from losing the argument last year decided to have another kick. That's going to continue to happen because there's still an agenda there ultimately.
But that in itself became the story, was when Noel Rock put up that thing of different pictures of you, Paul, and he was trying to make out that you were responsible for Lidl in some way getting robbed in Jobstown.
Yeah. There was obviously what happened at Jobstown or actually it's not strictly speaking in
No, it
Jobstown,
wasn't. And it wasn't those people
Fortunestown.
Yeah.
from everywhere.
That's true. Obviously it was horrific. The community is appalled by it, because they have the fear that if this can happen to Lidl, well then it can happen to them. Their local shop was robbed before then Lidl was attacked. So people are appalled by it. But the way it was used by, right-wing Twitter, including Noel Rock and the rest of them, to do two things. To re-demonize Jobstown working class communities in general, and basically say, what more do you expect of these people? This is the mob. And then to link it back really, really cynically to the trial and everything.
How quickly it was linked.
They jumped on it, the word Jobstown, and they thought, it's like, this is a vindication. It proves that they were guilty.
They should have paid water charges.
Again, it's just incredible, and so insulting to the community.
But that's, again, I think that's a better topic, because what you're talking there is actually class discrimination that's masquerading as what they like to say. Oh, it's just common sense, or it's not. I'm not a snob. I'm just saying they're all gougers. I'm sorry, lads, but the generalizations that go into these things, and what we've been trying to do this last few months actually is what we like to say is join the dots, in terms of showing that, actually, if you're going into any of these communities, you've got, you've got severe, you may have social deprivation, you may have other economic challenges, but what you have is, for the most part, you actually have a country that has more people back at work than ever in the history of the state. Okay, so none of that fits with the narrative that these are people who don't get out of bed early in Leo's eyes. That's all rubbish. We know from the people who were charged that a couple of them from up the road up here, one of them out in Blanchardstown. So they're not all from the one locality. And, to convict on the basis of a tweet, because that's what happens. Mm-hmm. So, it gets out there first, and that's what gets into the ether. And that's what's kind of disappointing about this is the fact that there was no real nuance to talk about why the people who are actually more afraid, as you put it. Because I saw people on Twitter actually who were living beside it and were very afraid and upset. Yeah. There was tears shed. That was the bigger story, not the actual, not the let's all get on, make selfies with ourselves and a crate of gummy bears. I think one fella stole gummy bears, for God's sake.
I mean, it was stupidity and loutishness, and everybody agrees it was stupid, it was loutish, and they should face the full rigours of whatever law is going to be thrown at them. But the problem is that there's far much more, and this is what I pointed out to my friends who were giving out about it. I said, you never came out, you never said anything about the banks, you haven't said anything about the hospitals, you haven't said anything about waiting lists, but as soon as Jobstown comes up, you feel free to say, scumbags.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff on social media really was a bit frightening in terms of the level of bile and prejudice that exists. I mean, within moments of the whole thing developing and hitting elements of the media, I was just being tagged in every kind of right-winger saying, oh, look at these, exactly using that word scumbags, to describe it. And it's funny, and it's not, because I put up a post on Facebook, put up one, condemning what was happening and putting another one up then shortly after, giving out about what was happening. And it was funny because most ordinary people aren't on Twitter. Most people are on Facebook, above a certain age and under a certain age are on Instagram. And there was loads of people from Tallaght who just didn't understand what I was referring to, because their timelines were full of other people from Tallaght condemning it, and rightly so. Whereas if you're not in this kind of political sphere, if
you're not in the echo chamber,
prejudice, was really something. And exactly, sure, nobody, people didn't condemn Foxrock for Graham Dwyer. People didn't condemn wherever the bankers were from for what the bankers did. Areas shouldn't be condemned for when these things happen. On the same night, there was a robbery from a supermarket down the country where they stole 250,000 worth of jewellery. Yeah. Now, that to me was the bigger story. It was an inside job, we think.
Okay.
It was
allegedly,
it was planned to a T. Now, they've recovered the stuff since, but that was a much bigger story than what happened in Jobstown. It was a more interesting story than what happened in Jobstown, but it sort of flew under the radar completely.
Yeah, I think definitely for some people, this was an opportunity to stick the boot in, which is why people in Jobstown and in Tallaght are so outraged about it because they feel, rightly so, that their good name is being damaged by the actions of, really, really a tiny minority who are, and I mean, a mixture of behaviour from like seriously bad antisocial behaviour to serious criminality. I mean, it's not just some young fellas get a JCB and knock down a Lidl, know where the safe is, etc. That's some element of serious criminality and planning, like, yeah.
But you get it in the Dáil too. You get it in the Dáil all the time. You're referred to, I mean, in the most derogatory of terms in the Dáil as well. Anytime you open your mouth, somebody is ready to knock you down or guffaw from a backbench somewhere and shout sinister fringe or whatever it is. And you, like me, we don't have fringes.
If only we have fringes.
It's all brotherhood.
How do you cope with that? Or do you just, does it just water off a duck's back at this stage?
I think there's two coping mechanisms. One is to use it to remind you of why you're angry at these people and to channel it, in a positive way. And the other thing is, I mean, and often people say this to you, often you give big speeches in the Dáil and sure there's 3 people there, And you have to always try and remember that you're not speaking to the people across the chamber. I'm not trying to convince Noel Rock or Leo Varadkar. Like, they represent different interests than the people I'm trying to represent. You're speaking to them. You have to remember you're using the Dáil as a platform to speak to people who are outside of the Dáil. And that was very obvious when the water charges movement was at its height, because you had a very defined constituency of hundreds of thousands of people who are involved in the movement, and you're speaking to them and saying, this is how I think is the next step of how we can win in terms of non-payment or the next protest or whatever. So you have to think of that audience out there and try to speak to them and avoid being dragged down into the gutter that is, unfortunately, the Dáil.
It is an awful place in terms of how a functioning democracy goes. Most recently, where it's it famously goes to what I remember. I was messing a few weeks ago and I said I want the term Grodesman's Law, because you have Godwin's Law where everybody gets to compare something to Hitler, whereas what we have in the Dáil is if Mary Lou MacDonald turned around and said, I was crossing the road earlier and a young girl fell and I helped her up, someone would shout Sinn Féin IRA, and you'd go like you'd immediately go to well, what about Jean McConville, because that was what Sean Burton famously shouted, Jean McConville, and I just thought, okay, so if that, but we haven't really risen very far above that level of discourse.
No, we haven't. And Varadkar just adds to it. He's that's the response to Sinn Féin. And Varadkar's response to the radical left is Venezuela.
Yeah, Venezuela.
I think the other day he mentioned Zimbabwe. Like all these, like, I don't hold any torch or candle for Zimbabwe, for Mugabe, etc.
Actually, this gets me a lot, we're mildly to the left. I mean, we're not radical left. You're not radical left. You are mildly to the left. Okay, you wear jeans, sometimes you wear boots, and you use words that are like less than 10 syllables. You're mildly to the left. You're nowhere near radical. And they make you out to be such a radical figure. And I'm wondering what's going to happen when they do actually see what radical left
That's
is.
because they've defined the centre as being has been to the right now. So they've dragged the centre to the right over the course of the last couple of decades. And then anybody who so much as suggests anything looks like a radical. I don't know. I actually don't know, Paul. You might actually be a bit more radical than we think.
I think I'm pretty
That's what I was going to say. So I would say, because in my heart of hearts, I would imagine, you're not for the answer to the capitalist crash that we had in the last 10 years isn't more capitalism, right? But what is the answer,
I think less capitalism.
I think the answer is socialism. And, I don't claim that that's an easy thing to achieve. It's difficult. We have to build mass support for that idea, and there currently isn't. There's mass support for opposition to water charges. I think there's majority support for repeal of the 8th Amendment, for abortion rights. There's mass support for a proper program of building social housing. That isn't generalized to a point of, okay, we need to get rid of this economic system. But I think there is the potential to do that in the crisis. I mean, people are looking for a radical alternative because they're completely disenfranchised with the entire political establishment, the way it works. And in different countries, that is reflected in the rise of the radical right, unfortunately, like in France, it was with UKIP in Britain, Trump in America, but also with the rise of left and radical left. And that does definitely, stretch from Corbyn, Sanders, people like ourselves, Germany.
There is a spectrum of it, but what frustrates me all the time is the lack of cohesion in terms of those, because when you don't see an actual, we were looking at books earlier, and I'm always thinking of T. Lawrence, The Pillars of Wisdom, and I always think, well, if we want something to stand, we need 4 pillars, and if you're going to fight on the 4 pillars, you go on health, bloody education, housing, and we need to pick an actual tackling inequality, right? If you can pick 4 of those and say we can stand up something and get a cohesive grouping together based on these 4 tenets, well, maybe you have something there that you can go to a disenfranchised electorate, because there is a disenfranchised electorate. We can laugh at Macron, and we frequently do, but in 24 months he grew a party and he became French president. So, because people say, oh, it can't be done. It clearly bloody well can.
Mm-hmm. And on the other side, I mean, Mélenchon almost got into the runoff. He was just narrowly off out of the runoff. He also grew extremely fast on the left. I mean, because what Macron represents is this attempt, successfully done in his case and in Trudeau's case, to just repackage neoliberalism in this nice new kind of package. And Varadkar, I mean, weirdly attempts to do that as well, on the basis of being young, being LGBT, but like, he's the leader of Fine Gael, which is the party that went to fight with Franco. You know what I mean? It's blue shirt, so it doesn't work, like, in the same way. There's less basis to it. And even for Macron, I mean, Macron's popularity ratings are now lower than Trump, like, you know what I mean? There's huge opposition. But it can be done.
It can be done, is the point.
Politics is massively in flux.
We'd have been destroyed by Brexit already if Theresa May hadn't stupidly called a general election. Because she thought Jeremy Corbyn is a walking joke. Right. I'll crush him, I'll get a majority, and then I'll be able to thumb my nose at the EU. She called that election. Corbyn, Labour tried to get rid of him twice. Mm-hmm. He came out of nowhere. He's a pacifist on a commie bike, on a commie bicycle, and that's what they said. Yeah. And now they're terrified that if the Tories collapse, he'll march into power. Yeah.
And and the Labour MPs were looking forward to an election and Corbyn getting hammered, because then they'd finally be done with him, because they tried to get rid of him twice.
And they've been back to Blair now.
Exactly. Some Blair Jr. And like what happened was that Corbyn's ideas, it's not Corbyn's personality. Corbyn, no. He clearly comes across a very nice, genuine guy, but he's not some charismatic figure like Mélenchon or someone. But his ideas, the idea of renationalising rail, the idea of scrapping tuition fees, the idea of increasing the minimum wage, people were just like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me.
But can I counter that with, they're not even his ideas. Mm-hmm. Because this is what we have to keep saying, and I want to come back to, there's always, the solutions to all the world's problems have been found. We just lack implementation. Okay, so simple things like that. Maybe it's been done well in Singapore, and you take that, or this has been done well in Venezuela, right? Or whatever you want to pluck something from it. And what you then meet with is, it's not that easy. And of course it bloody is that easy. If you want to make something a living wage as opposed to a minimum wage, if you want to have a concept, I read a great article yesterday that showed how basic income, universal basic income, should be adopted on both the left and the right, because it's economically, it makes sense, and B, it lifts people out of poverty. So it's the cheapest alternative to the welfare state. So it appeases the right, and it helps gives people an underlying proper.
The thing I'd say to that, I mean, is that I agree that there's a lot of that the good ideas exist out there, right? But I would say they're not just like good ideas in the abstract. Good ideas serve class interests. Mm. So having low corporation tax is a quote unquote good idea for the multinationals who don't want to pay any corporation tax. It's a bad idea for those of us who want to have access to public services. A high minimum wage is a good idea for people who are on low wages and want to have an increase in wages. It's a bad idea for companies who don't rely on selling to workers and would suffer a reduction in profits. So and the same applies to basic income, is in the sense that I could see there are dangers with universal basic income in the hands of the right, because what they potentially could use it for is just say, it's like a neoliberal social welfare model. It's like, here you go, here's $1,000. We're not going to give you any healthcare. We're not going to give you any education. We're not going to give you any child benefit. We're not going to give you any other universal things. Mm-hmm. There's your money. Go into the marketplace and go and get it. So it really depends on the way these things are implemented in whose class interests, in the interests of The 99% or in the interest of the 1%?
It comes back to where when you spoke about the multinationals, and there was a conversation to be had recently where they were saying about the profits, all-time high money coming through Ireland. Okay, we repatriated all. We broke every record, and I always say it like, you know, in the IFSC, I think it's 10 times the national GDP of this country goes through the IFC alone. Okay, and we talk about this, and it's a wonderful Wavin pipe, I like to call it, because this stuff just flows through. Yeah. Okay, so what you have there, you have that money flowing through, and we're patting ourselves on the back. And no one ever says, when the shareholder value has been talked about, no one ever says, you know what, guys, we need to give the workers more of a pay rise. They actually talk about pay restraint, and that's been so when you've got everything growing by 6 or 7%, including rents and things like and prices, and people are preaching wage restraint. That's where the imbalance is, and that's what. But the left hasn't made that argument properly, especially not to the public that it's trying to woo.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to claim that we've done everything right. I don't think we have. I think, you know, we have made mistakes. There were missed opportunities. I think the water charges movement was an opportunity to build a big political movement of the left. And I think that window of opportunity, based on big mobilizations of loads of people, has now closed, and that opportunity, unfortunately, for a whole range of different reasons, which are real, but wasn't taken. Because I think out of the water charges movement, you could have potentially had like a big party of the left that has different currents within it, that has people who are currently in Solidarity, in People for Profit, some of the people who are in Independence for Change, loads of people who are in none of those parties, just ordinary people. Potentially a big party of the left that could have been a reference point, could have been built, or at least the embryo of that, and that didn't happen. But I think, thankfully, opportunities will arise again.
Because you've got Fine Gael in there, of course.
The centre hasn't, you know, they like to talk about kind of the centre restabilising. And obviously, the so-called centre, which is the right, they have gone up in the opinion polls. They've gone up from just under 50 to just under 60. But they haven't gone back up. It's not back to the old normal. They haven't got back to their historic levels of 80, 85, 90%.
Yeah, but you've got to remember what happened with when Theresa May called the election. She was cocksure. True. She was cocksure she was going to get the numbers she wanted. And instead they got gutted. Yeah. And even now the percentages are that Corbyn would get in right now.
Well, the problem in Ireland is that Leo's more popular than his party. So Leo is the most popular leader by a mile, but the actual TDs. Martin, you can be all you want. Opinion poll after opinion poll puts him. He's twice as popular as nearly his nearest rival, right? That's just us. And even though Micheál Martin outfoxed him on the whole, he did. He outfoxed him on the spin unit and on the Garda Commissioner. By the way, he outfoxed him when they got to the. I stand by Frances Fitzgerald. She will not resign. 3 days later, I accepted her resignation. And you know, look, I'm no fan of Micheál Martin. No, hang on, let me finish. The problem is, the TDs that represent Fine Gael aren't going to actually garner votes because the poster I'm going to see outside will be of Leo because it's going to be, it's almost going to be like a presidential campaign.
Well, we had Brian Hayes in here a couple of weeks ago. Did you? Yeah. He's sitting on that chair.
It's fair play.
And Brian Hayes, I asked him, what's your marketing ploy? And the marketing ploy is like, basically, here's Leo. Leo ticks every box. Isn't Leo grateful for us? And I said, well, I really hope that you are now the director of elections again. And I hope that's the message you're selling. I hope that's what you're selling. But they are selling it. They're selling a personality rather than politics. They're selling Leo as something you can all aspire to. Now, okay, I know you're not going to like this, but you and Leo don't have a huge background difference on your origins.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say he's better off than I was, but yes, I come from the middle class,
So there's not a whole lot. So you have a social conscience, and Leo has whatever conscience somebody tells him to have on that particular day, and that's how it works. He's not. You're about ethics. He's about neoliberalism, which is absolutely nothing to do with what's right or what's wrong. It's all about what's profitable. They think you can walk out to Tallaght and lead people in, people in Tallaght are just these sheep
It's classic
standing in a field.
outside agitated.
And here, and excuse me for saying this, here comes slightly posh boy with slightly posh accents. Come on, follow me. And they all run along behind. Now, I know Tallaght, and you know Tallaght.
Yeah.
They laugh at you.
Yeah.
Absolutely crease up laughing at you.
And that's the thing, actually, is that, interestingly, on that, the protest in Jobstown on, the 15th of November 2014, it was a mixed crowd in terms of reception to me, because you had this very harshly fought by-election beforehand between us and Sinn Féin.
Yeah.
And Sinn Féin would have beaten us in Jobstown. We beat them in the following election, but they would have beaten us there. And so I remember one of my co-defendants that was sitting down beside him, people were saying, I voted for Paul. This guy who I became friends with then afterwards, I didn't vote for Paul, I voted for Carl, So exactly, they can't wrap their heads around the idea that ordinary people, working class people, are capable of making decisions for themselves, capable of protesting for themselves, capable of getting organised for themselves, and they don't need me to be this outside agitator to get them going.
No.
Exactly, but they just can't. They can't deal with that.
The idea that people in working class areas could actually do anything for themselves, but they have been doing it forever for themselves.
Yes.
I mean, their involvement in working class politics is only relatively new. Really, and I said this at the time, what happened out in Jobstown was a pissing match between politicians. It was territory to be fought over. Joan Burton was sneaking in under your nose to take a nice little photo for publicity. She was down with the poor people. And it got disrupted, and they really didn't like it. The other thing that bothered me so much, was, that poor little OAP woman in that car. Joan Burton is ruthless politician, a ruthless politician with a lifetime career of burying people. Even her predecessor in his autobiography talks about being stood up against a wall and shot. And that's what he talks about in his autobiography. This is what Joan Burton is.
And that political calculating mind didn't disappear when she was in the car in Jobstown.
No, it did not.
Because we thankfully have video and audio from inside the cars, sporadically separated throughout the course of the time in the car. It never demonstrates that she's in fear of her life or whatever. And what it does demonstrate is that she says to her assistant, what you should do now is go on social media and say about all the young kids running around in Jobstown, no one looking after them.
Cynical.
Absolutely
really
cynical. And in court, she, first of all, didn't remember saying it, despite the fact that she'd previously been testified about it in the children's court. And then when, well, look, you did say it, here's the video. She said, I didn't mean for her to go on social media. It was just something to say to, break up the silence.
Taking that on another step, because this is where this ultimately is going. I think you want a public inquiry into what happened there, and on the basis of the demands for a public inquiry. You mentioned when we started this conversation that your social media manager,
Dave
Murphy, was the most dangerous man in Ireland. And I thought it was quite funny that he was deemed a danger, and yet guard after guard, allegedly perjuring themselves, wasn't deemed a danger.
Yeah, in fact, the Garda operation was deemed, according to the own Garda dealer, qualified success, which has people dragged through courts for something that they're then found
it's a
not
qualified
guilty
success,
of,
like Dunkirk was a qualified success.
Yeah, I mean, if this is a qualified success, I'd like to know what a failure looks like. But exactly, I mean, unfortunately, we're banging our heads off a brick wall about this public inquiry. There was kind of a certain opening. I mean, the basis of it is the fact that the guards lied, they clearly lied, and they lied in a coordinated way. And the reason we know that is because we have the video evidence of what happened. We know that they were right beside it, so they did hear what happened, and yet they all have the same story, which isn't the same story as the facts. So the only way that's reconcilable is that, well, at some level, guards got together.
Collective amnesia, maybe.
If only that was paralleled somewhere else in the guards that the public could see, a tribunal or something. If only that was parallel. Yeah. This is commonplace within the Gardaí. And anybody who has dealings with the Gardaí knows this.
Can I say, Martin, it's not even it's every power structure, every system protects itself. Mm-hmm. At some point, any system that's set up to serve people stops serving people for its own benefit. So we're not going to limit that to the Gardaí. That's what happens when you've permanent civil servants as well that we have.
Now, I sometimes I think, had you actually been sent down, and you were looking at a life.
I mean, up to a life. I probably wouldn't have got life, but I probably would have got prison time.
You were looking up to a life. And I honestly think sometimes you could have been our Mandela figure. You could have been in the joy there. We could be all with lights outside.
Spike Island.
Or it could be forgotten about. Remember that water charges thing?
Your man,
he's still in prison, I think.
Your man out in Lambay Island eating wallabies.
Yeah. But you could have been. It could have happened. I mean, sometimes I think, would the country be better if it had happened? Not from their point of view, but from an international point of view.
But I think you have to think, right, that even though they lost, even though we were found not guilty, they still went on an offensive afterwards. So we were we should have been more ready for it, but we thought, okay, we've won, now we're going to be on the offensive and demand an inquiry. But they were still on the offensive. So if they had won, just imagine the impact it would have had. And I do think there are people who are good people who would have thought, they were found guilty. So, and it would have acted to criminalise the left, which is what it was about.
There's absolutely no question that is still the mindset. You got to think about it in terms of, and who's also implicated in the Maurice McCabe thing is Paul Williams. Mm-hmm. And, Paul Williams Newstock had to apologise for his behaviour after the way he spoke about the people in Jobstown. And, these things, it is a very small world in Irish media, politics and policing. There's the reason Superintendent David Taylor was able to admit that he was able to text these people to disseminate this information is because when Paul Williams said a source within, he didn't mean a source within, he meant bloody David Taylor. Mm-hmm. It's the same when I heard Leo Varadkar say, when you hear Kevin Doyle in the Indo saying source close to the Taoiseach. No, that's a text from Leo Varadkar, yes. Kevin. So just admit it.
Yes, correct. A source close to isn't invariably the actual person. You know what I mean? This is code. And that, I mean, the crime correspondents are like a classic illustration. Not all of them. There's some really good independent crime correspondents, but of how media, politics, and establishment and Gardaí establishment mesh in together. Because, if you agree to effectively be a mouthpiece for the tops of the Gardaí, well, then they tell you when the crimes happen before anyone else. You get there first. You get the story. You get the inside, story again.
LA Confidential.
And that's what happens. And some of the crime correspondents, Paul Williams, I think Paul Reynolds as well, have played that role. And it's poisonous in terms of being an independent media.
But now they have the special communications unit, so they can get all the messages in one place and get them on form. How you find and fighting against the communications unit?
It was funny. I was in the cinema for the first time since it came out, and I heard about it, and it came on. It's funny, I was with my wife and she's like, "That's mad!" He's just mad. If you go and see the ad, it's like. It is very blatant state propaganda.
Oh, so
it's kind of thing you'd imagine in a Stalinist country. There's 40-year plan. You know what I mean? We're going to have all these great things over the next. It's weird.
The map of Ireland is rolled out.
Things are just
everything pops up out. Airports pop up out of the ground. Yeah. It is.
And then I mean, he's off in the States, and there's 714 people on trolleys, and he was asked in the States, "Why? What do you think?" I don't know why that's happening. Yeah, he's still,
even though he's Taoiseach, he still is the commentator.
Taoiseach.
But that's he's never going to change.
No,
that's who he is. He's such a straight shooter.
I know, yeah.
And it's no, he's not a straight shooter. No. He's actually, when you think of the likes when Boris Johnson, they were journalists who became politicians. They were commentators who became politicians. Mm-hmm. Leo was always just a commentator anyway, and he just happened to get a few things right. He did get a few things right. He was right about Maurice McCabe from the outset when other people weren't. So he's managed to, whether he's lucky or not, because, is it
well marketed?
No, success has gone from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. That man has failed at everything and still keeps grinning, okay? Yeah. He's failed from department to department. He quit law, he quit medicine, he quit health, he quit Department of Social Protection, and now he's in charge of the whole place. So you know what, guys, he's the blueprint for winning through failure.
Well, I think he's a little like our Boris Johnson. I think his Achilles heel is
how insensitive he is to ordinary people.
Yes.
He really has a blind spot
Lack of empathy.
in terms of, and I think that's going to tell at a certain stage. He doesn't have an understanding about the lives that people have and the fact that people are reliant on their fuel allowance. People are reliant on their fibre.
That was a great moment when the veil slipped again, where he said, don't turn on your heating, the government won't be doing this.
Yeah.
And then he walked outside and someone got in his ear and said, listen, when we were in the height of the crisis in 2010, we had the IMF at the door and we still doubled the fuel allowance. If you don't do this now, you're going to be kidding. And then of course we're doubling the fuel allowance. Yeah. Tory boy, as they like to call him, is still alive and well. He's just got a bit more better handlers around.
Polished. Yeah. He's well protected too. He is well protected.
He is, but I think you slip up again and again in that respect of just being really cold, because part of it's conscious. Like the early getting up, people who get up early in the morning, that wasn't an accident. No. That was real dog whistle stuff. Yeah. Saying that these people in Jobstown don't get up early when in fact they probably get up earlier because they're on shift work, because they're working all night. You know what I mean? People aren't just sitting around doing nothing. But it's a definite conscious appeal to a right-wing section of society, a Fine Gael base, but also it's just who he is. Like he's right-wing. He doesn't have empathy for working class people. He thinks, like he famously said to Lynn Ruane asked him, if you were born in Sean McDermott Street, would you still be Taoiseach today? And he said, yeah. And it's just, that doesn't take into account the reality.
Well, the jump from nice little posh boy private school to Taoiseach is quite a small jump. Yeah. Whereas the jump from working class area to Taoiseach, I don't think it's actually ever been done. I don't think anybody's actually made that jump. The dynamic in the Dáil is changing. You have Mary Lou now, charged Sinn Féin. You have smaller parties on the left. Where do you see it going? Because we can say that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, to a great sense, have consolidated. They might be telling us that they have a whatever we'll call it, the coalition of the willing. That's what I kind of like to call it. But they've shown their hand in that they're interchangeable. So wherefore the left now? How does the left break that model down?
Well, I think it's useful, the Fianna Fáil Fine Gael thing. Obviously they avoided just a straight up coalition because it just would be too blatant that both parties are the same. They represent the interests of Irish capitalism and multinational capitalism that is here. So they're still trying to maintain the pretense, and that's useful for them.
But also denuded opposition by doing that.
Yes, exactly. The leader of the opposition has a direct line to the Taoiseach. They work things out in advance, etc. But I think a lot of people can hopefully see what that represents, so that's good, and that creates a certain space to the left. I think that the task is, the immediate task in the next election is for the left, to forces to the left of Sinn Féin, forces that are against coalition with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, need to try and come together on a basic platform of opposition to austerity, of opposition to coalition with the right, people power centred politics. Have a slate of the next elections that incorporates solidarity, people for profit, others, including others we don't know about yet, and return a decent left fraction to the Dáil that's bigger now, bigger then, bigger in the future than we currently are.
Yeah.
In order to be able to represent a credible alternative that says, look, we can have a left government in this country. And that has to be linked to movements. It's not going to happen without movements.
We had Rory Hearn here a few months ago, and Rory spoke about building civil society first, about building consensus first, about building, because, about actually being able to sell a message, it requires a certain level of, this is the alternative, this is, and what's achievable, what wins it can have. And I think it's interesting. I do note you've omitted Sinn Féin because they've spoken of coalition in government. So that's obviously a deal breaker for you, is it?
Yeah, I think, to come back, you mentioned 4 pillars earlier, health, education, housing, etc. I agree with those things. But I think you have to look at the reality of left parties and supposed left parties in Ireland and what their history is and what the lessons to draw from it is. And I just think there's a blatant lesson staring you in the face from Labour, the Green Party, is that if you go into coalition with the right-wing parties, you will sell out. You will sell out and you'll disappoint your voting base, and you won't make any meaningful change for ordinary people, and instead the left will be set back. That's what's happened. I think fundamentally, unfortunately, Sinn Féin is a capitalist nationalist party. And I think that, that's always been our position in the sense that we've been saying that.
I would say they're pragmatists, but that's probably because I think that there's more of they're playing a longer term game and have been since.
But that's what, if you go back before 2011 general election, Labour were talking very anti-austerity, but they were also pragmatists. They were going to be willing to discuss it anyway because, they wanted to make a real difference, as opposed to painting us as kind of, you're for change in the far distant future. We'll deliver change now. But then we saw what happened with the Labour Party. I mean, Connolly has a great quote at the end of Socialism Made Easy, where he talks about those who are practical. And those who are practical will always sell out. You have to stand for something fundamentally different. And I believe, who made more of a difference for ordinary people in the course of the election, say when Labour was in 2011 to the one afterwards? Yeah. Was it Labour or was it the left? Labour was in government. The difference that Labour made was that they stuck the boot into ordinary people. The difference that the left made, despite not being in government, being in opposition, but linked to movements on water charges, etc., I think we were able to achieve more for ordinary people. I think it's...
Labour, only thing they talk about is the fact that the marriage equality. But I got to also temper that always by the fact that when they said they achieved marriage equality, they also warned us that if they weren't in power at this time, that we wouldn't have a referendum on the 8th Amendment. And lo and behold, we're going to have one on the 25th of May.
Correct.
So
it shows the power of movements.
Exactly.
Because they were gloating after the last election, being like, all these left people liking, thinking that it's great because Labour got smashed. You're never going to have repeal the 8th now. And really mean stuff. And the point is the movement won it. And, Labour in government voted repeatedly against, legislation that would have brought in abortion in the case of fatal fetal abnormalities and legislation for a referendum on repeal the 8th. And, they've rediscovered their consciences on this, on housing, on all sorts of issues now.
We had this...
It's so paper thin.
Martin wrote about bogus self-employment recently. We've 12,000 words of a tome about it. We had Ken Fox in the other day to talk to Martin about it, and we had this conversation. We have a podcast up there now that discusses it. Labour were in there, and now they keep saying, and Jed Nash is all agitating about, bogus self-employment, and you're going, you were there, you were at the coalface, you let it happen, you actually let it spiral out of control.
Somebody got in touch with me on Twitter last night and pointed out, Regina has said we've no issue with bogus self-employment, nothing to see here, move along. But actually, somebody found something from 2013, when John Burton was in social welfare, where she says the exact opposite. And the numbers were much smaller. We have a problem, and she called it what did she call it? Disguised self. But they have this other word for it. And that it does need attention. So it's only gotten worse since 2013. It was a problem to be addressed back then, but Joan forgot that very quickly. Yeah. And now you've Regina where it's worse, and she's going, no, we've no problem here. But actually, there's a report from 2013 saying, there is a problem. So they know this thing. Labour tried Labour. Never going to go anywhere with Labour. Never going to go anywhere with Labour. And the problem for me with the left, and I think for a lot of people who are trying to be active on the left, you guys are snowed under with stuff.
It's true.
And I know this from talking to Mick and Claire and other people. You're snowed under.
Yeah. We are, yeah. I mean, that's true. Every day, people give you more stuff. You know what I mean? More injustices, because there's so many injustices out there.
A huge amount.
Yeah. And we can't...
You can't text Kevin Doyle to say everything's great, though.
Source far close to Paul Murphy says everything's great. We can't win change on the big things without a movement. That's the reality. For example, on housing. Housing is the biggest crisis facing people in this country now, probably combined with the lack of bodily autonomy of women because of the 8th Amendment. And there needs to be a movement on housing. That's the only way the government's going to come under pressure to actually build houses. Instead, they're just going to talk about the fact that they're building houses and no houses are ever going to appear. And then until the next government's in, and they're going to rinse and repeat. And we have to do what we did on water, on housing. And it's understandable that it's a bit more difficult, or water was easy for people in a sense because they want your money.
It wasn't abstract. There was no abstract.
Yeah, you just refuse to pay. It's an very concrete, easy thing. Yeah, whereas housing is such a big problem, and people know it's massive.
But the problem with housing, and this is, as a banker, the problem with housing is that the people who were in negative equity have now emerged from negative equity. The people who all are working class, who think they're middle class, because we have a population that sits in that, where we're very aspirational in our. If you ask an accountant, he'll tell you he's middle class. You ask a taxi driver, he'll tell you he's middle class, and they all see housing as someone else's problem as well. And especially with the voting bloc, the 35-year-old to 45-year-old, which is the biggest demographic now, they're all sitting there going, well, you know what, I suffered for the last few years. Sure, geez, I'm getting a few bob extra on the rent now if they were landlords, or they're getting the house is worth more now, I've changed the car. And
I mean, I think there are a minority. There's winners and losers out of the housing crisis. People win big time out of the housing crisis. Them being the developers, people, the land banks, etc.
But the ABC ones are winning at the moment.
But it is a minority in society that benefits from the housing crisis. It's a majority that lose. And I think it's a question of also, like, owning the message on the housing crisis. That means that it deals with all the different steps of the housing crisis. Because everyone's gone down, or everyone in the majority category has gone down one step. So the people who previously would have been able to afford to buy their house now can't and have to pay huge amounts of money in rent. People who previously would have been renting now can barely afford to rent, or in very precarious situations, can find themselves in homelessness, in hotels, etc. People who previously would have been in hostels find themselves rough sleeping. It's like everyone has been kicked down one rung, and we have to build a movement of all of that.
Well, they cut the ladder in half.
But
they simply cut it in half.
But there's
no way up.
But the argument has to be put, and this is where because Martin keeps saying, where's the number? Is it 10,000 where people are going to get upset? Is it was, because we thought there'd be a red line. There's no red line, because the 10,000 is probably passed before the results come out of last month's, of February's, right? When we get February report, we're probably over 10,000. We're thereabouts anyway. The argument has to start being put to that ABC one, that this is economic incompetence, because it's €69,000 a year to house someone in emergency accommodation, and you can build a house up the road for 151,000. So for less than three years of that, we can house them permanently. Yeah. What we're doing is economic stupidity, and this is by the Fine Gael, who market themselves as the custodians.
But what it's about is, it was summed up brilliantly by Owen Murphy when he said what it's not about. He said this is not about money, resources, or ideology.
Yeah.
That is exactly what it's about. And ideology is at the root of it, because they don't want to build houses.
Well, we call it the politics of spite. Mm-hmm. The cheapest solution for a homeless person, the cheapest solution for the state, is build a house or an apartment and give it to them. Gratis, walk away. That's the cheapest and the most sustainable, and the one that can make the most impact and actually give better results. But they won't do it because they have this notion, you're getting something for nothing.
That's ideology.
You have to drop the spite element and realise, okay, you have a choice here. You can either fund forever this person and give them no chances, or you can build a house. It's the cheapest way to do it. Take them out of a chaotic lifestyle, give them some security, and then they will start to contribute to society. But this mental block is, but they'll get something.
Mel Reynolds put the price of HAP versus building a social house. Yeah. It's €315,000 more expensive for the state to go the HAP route over a 30-year term. Yeah.
So I've seen figures. I think it's over 10 years that HAP is like a transfer from the public to landlords.
That's right.
Of billions, I think.
Well, it's already
it's 4 billion by 2020.
But it's already half a billion. It'll be half a billion this year.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a transfer, And there's been a huge, the landlords. And I'm not saying there aren't individual landlords, accidental landlords who've ended up in difficulty, right? But the landlord, representatives who represent the big landlords, put on this crying of how difficult it is, etc. Landlord profits are through the roof. Of course they are. Because rents are out of control, and they're, I don't mean it necessarily in an insulting way, but landlords, in that sense, are parasitical upon society. They're not producing any wealth, they're not adding any benefit to society, they're just benefiting from it.
It's what Lorcan Sir actually said. He said the market isn't dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. The market's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. It's hollowing out as much profit. Again, like I said, rent seeking at the outset. It's about hollowing out and creating no wealth, but increasing your share of the pie.
Yeah.
And that's what that market is. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Because if you don't put proper regulations, proper constraints, and actually have a supply that tempers it, it won't work. And look, we know housing is the biggest crisis facing this country. We agree that this needs, we've spoken to a range of experts about it. What we're not seeing is, as you said, enough of an awakening in the public to say that, guys, I think I said to someone the other day, I said, it'd be lovely to turn around to someone and say, yeah, we know it's nice to be able to say, aren't they scumbags who won't pay for anything? But would you not prefer an extra week in Lake Garda? Because, you know, they'd pay less bloody income tax if we sorted out the social housing crisis, because it would be cheaper for the state to function.
But I think what it comes down to is they don't want to concede state intervention is necessary to resolve a social crisis. Because then the question would be, okay, let's have state intervention in something else.
Yeah,
and maybe the market doesn't resolve all our problems, because it clearly doesn't.
And you're right, because wasn't it when we hit 500 people on trolleys 10 years ago, that was declared an emergency. Right. And yesterday we had 714, right. And it wasn't declared an emergency. Yeah. So we've moved the goalpost to what's acceptable.
Susan Mitchell writes for the Sunday Business Post, the health person for Sunday Business Post. And Susan, one of the lonely voices out there banging this out all the time. And she said last night she can see it being over 800 within 2 years because nothing is happening.
Yep.
Now, the same as this is the exact same situation with housing. I was able to predict a year ago where the housing figures would be now, and I just predicted same rate of rise, and they will do fuck all to fix it. Yeah, and that's where it was. So you can predict for next year and the year after. If they do nothing, this is where it'll be at, and invariably they are the numbers they're hitting every single year.
And I think it's a good example of the kind of the class interest that I'm talking about, right? Where I think it's 25% of TDs are landlords, a higher percentage.
I think it's actually higher.
Yeah, I think it's of the government. And I'm not saying they're doing these things out of like a narrow sense of, oh, my rent's going to go up to like keep the housing crisis worse. But it's a coincidence of personal economic interests and economic ideology, and that all comes down to, oh no, the free market is the way to resolve these things ultimately. And like everything the government does on housing is about incentivizing private developers by giving them money, basically, to go and build houses, as opposed to using the money that is public money to build houses, which would be public assets, which would generate rent, and which would resolve a social crisis over a period of years.
Mel went through all the figures with us. And it was basically, look, you build this house, X number of years later, you've already made your value, and you still have your principal asset. Yeah. You still have your principal asset. Yeah. And why would you do it any other way? It's just so, from an economic point of sense, that's how you make money. Mm-hmm. That's what the landlords are doing. So why is the state
they have people paying off their mortgages and then it's theirs?
So why is the state doing something different to what the landlords are doing and hoping that that's all?
Because it is ideological, man. It's driven purely by, they talk about the free market, and we all know it's not even a free market. It's a rigged market for the guys who are already the haves. That's just what it is. There's a reason Tom Parlin gets an audience with anybody he wants. You know,
he gets what he wants. I mean, most of their asks, the Construction Industry Federation, most of their asks for the budget they got.
Oh yeah.
You know, whereas the homeless groups, they didn't get their asks in the budget. That's the difference.
I mentioned about the children who are working on spinal operations. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that in the context of the money that's going on the Strategic Communications Unit. And there are a group on Twitter who follow and
Scoliosis Network.
Yeah.
God, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking. These people were promised this. It's never going to reach target. They're never going to be taken care of. Mm-hmm. And we've had people in here saying that the Fine Gael line is, Sean, where are you going to get the money from? Where are you going to get the money from? But they are spending money hand over fist on what they want to spend it on. Correct. Money is not the issue. Correct. It was never the issue.
Correct. I mean, where did you get the money from? They've been spending that for 10 years of the crisis.
I can't let this one go without saying the hockey fucking pitch for the 1%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, is there nobody within government who goes, oh look,
this looks a bit bad.
There's 150 grand going to a hockey pitch here where they get 6 million in private school.
I know.
Why wouldn't we just divert that money into the spinal operations and it will look a little better? But there's nobody with that common sense saying, look, if we said, oh well, in a good year we could justify this, but while there's kids waiting on spinal operations, we can't justify this. And who's going to say you're putting a foot wrong? Everybody's going to agree right across the spectrum.
I know.
But no, they like to rub your nose in it. They
It's because
like
of that blind spot as well.
Yeah.
It's because they're speaking to their own people and they don't really give a consideration to other people.
And golf clubs.
Exactly. I mean, it's an extreme version of their people. Their people are more than that, but it's a certain section of their people that they're speaking to. I mean, the other big answer to where you're going to get the money is, well, we're spending money right now to fight a case in the European Court of Justice to say we don't want 13 billion of tax. It's just the idea that they can still come out with this question of where are you going to get the money. I mean, there's the money for a lot of stuff.
My dad's a retired businessman working for himself. His view on it is, somebody offers you a wad of money like that, even if you know you might have to give it back at some stage.
Yeah, please take it.
Oh yeah, thanks very much. It gets stuck in the account.
They put it in an escrow account outside of the state, by the way.
Yeah, but you put it. They're never. Nobody's ever going to see that money again.
Just on the Apple money, okay. Leaving the fact that so it's 13 billion plus
maybe 6 billion.
It's nearly 6 billion in interest. It should be closer to 19. So we should stop talking 13. We should be talking nearly 20.
Yeah.
That aside, that was illegal state aid. That was we know that. That is actually at the crux of what all we do. Mm-hmm. Everything we do that's wrong is actually about to the benefit. It goes back to what we said about water. Why a multinational pay less for water than I will if I want to have a shower. Okay, that's what it is. It's actually about tipping the scales. Give me something to pin my hopes on, Paul. But where do we take that battle to? Because I keep saying to Martin, go to Margaret Vestager and tell her you want something done. Because you're not going to get it in the Dáil.
No, I think ultimately you won't get it with Margaret Vestager either, though. Like. They have their own interests. They do. What that's about from their point of view is competition between European capitalism and American capitalism.
Geopolitics.
Yeah. And I mean, you had the stuff in America where the Volkswagens got done for the emissions scam, and they forced people to, they forced Volkswagen to pay for new cars because it was a European company. So you have a conflict between European capitalism and US capitalism. I think one thing to be clear on is what a bad position Irish capitalism is in. Like, the picture is so poor in terms of their strategy, right? Their strategy is, and it's the only strategy they have, is we'll be this great place for multinational corporations. Mm-hmm. But the window is just closing on that really, really fast. The reason it's closing is because Trump is also now engaged in a race to the bottom in terms of corporation tax, and he's going to attract them back. Other European countries are also engaged in that race to the bottom.
The CCCTB, the Common Consolidated Corporate Tax Base.
Yeah, and in the context of Brexit, with Ireland in the European Council negotiations and stuff was generally allied with Britain as in that model of low tax, kind of shallow European Union, big free trade area on a neoliberal basis, etc. And Britain kind of defended Ireland's role as a tax haven there. With Britain gone, the other European countries, the governments, European Commission, etc., is going to focus in on it, and exactly CCTB, digital tax, etc. So their strategy is finished. It's over. And you have to break from that strategy. You need an alternative developmental model for the economy.
There's a simple one in terms of the tackling the tax, because we are a tax haven. Mm-hmm. Pascal stood up and said, we're not a tax haven.
But we are just the most transparent.
Yes, we've the highest rating of all tax havens in the world. And we've higher rating than the Cayman Islands and all. We're the best tax haven, actually. But more importantly, we do it through transfer pricing. Mm-hmm. So if we were to turn around and say, well, you know what we'll do actually, folks, we'll do transfer pricing on the basis that you pay tax where the jobs are. So Apple, you have 6,000 people here, but you have 18,000 people in Germany. Mm-hmm. If you give us another 50% of that workforce, you can then divert your profits through us, and then all of a sudden it's a more equitable thing. There's ways we can actually do this that are actually good for society and good for the multinationals. There is give and take. But what we have is, you know what, Apple, actually, what we'll do is we'll instead of actually ending transfer pricing, we'll have a brass plate here that allows you to invoice there and actually say we have a call center there, and everything's actually produced in Germany. We'll forget them. We can't carry on like that. That's not going to be sustainable. Beggar thy neighbour is not going to work for much longer.
Yeah, but that's exactly. I mean, the strategies they were using with the Netherlands, the Cayman Islands, etc., the double Irish has been shut down under huge pressure, but it's been replaced by a thing called the single malt.
Yeah.
I think it's
The double malt.
Or Concern.
And the ideas box. Don't forget the ideas.
And
knowledge box, the knowledge box.
Exactly, which is it's just a tax avoidance scam. That's what it is, or indeed.
Have you seen so the knowledge box is based on innovation, and so what actually happens is you're a big multinational, you buy a company that's innovating, and then you can get their tax credits. That's that. And the best countries in Europe at the moment for innovation are Ireland, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, which are the three biggest tax avoiders, boys and girls.
It's something like 80% of our net outflows from Ireland go through tax havens. Go through Netherlands, Cayman Islands, Bermuda. It's like Ireland is a tax haven. It's a tax haven of a special sort. Like different countries play different roles in a chain of tax avoidance. Ireland's role is exactly transfer pricing, exaggerate this and then ship the money off to somewhere else that plays a different role. But it is, and the government has no intention of moving away from it. And the way I pose it is that like that model of reliance on multinationals is finished. We have like a unique opportunity with this 19 billion, I'm in favor of using some of it to resolve immediate crises, but the main thing I'm for is using it to change the model of the economy and instead have big public investment, big public ownership, and invest in things like green energy. Ireland is like, we're an island off the west coast of Europe. We're a potential massive source in terms of wind and wave energy. And the private sector generally hasn't done it because it's too much of a risk. Investing billions to go and do it.
There was a company in Galway Galway Roscommon that came up with the floating wind turbines.
Yes.
And they had to set up in Scotland because they were priced out of Ireland.
Yeah.
The idiocy of that.
Whereas the state could invest in a big way, and Ireland could be leading the way there, of what is going to be the new oil.
And this is always what happens to people on the left. And so we have loads of solutions.
You just don't get to implement them.
We don't get to implement them. We think about things. Our unifying purpose is not profit. Now, when people say, why is the right cohesive and the left not cohesive?
I like when they call them, when Oliver Collins says people before progress, I get a great laugh out of it.
Well, the right is always unified by profit. It's very easy to unify people under the banner, let's all make some money. And that's very easy. It's much harder to unify people under banners who are saying, look, this is sustainable, this is long term, this is how we go forward into the future, this is how we adapt to a new economic world, this is how we future-proof ourselves for shock. That's much more difficult to sell to people.
It is, but people are looking for that more and more, and that's why I do have confidence when you look around the world and you look at, for example, Jeremy Corbyn. The people want actually quite a radical left message. They want an alternative, and they want an alternative that exactly is sustainable, economically, environmentally. People are much more aware of those things than they were before. So I think there is an appetite for it. I think some of it is it's not seen. And I think, like what you were saying earlier, with an election where people engage in politics and think a bit more, you might be surprised at how people go. And I think the other thing that's needed is to make all these things real. It's a bit like kind of version of what we're hearing saying. You need movements, because movements give people a sense of their power and the idea that things can be different, as opposed to just
the water movement was a gift from Fine Gael. It was a gift. It was a gift. But I don't think it's gone. I think it's just latent. I think even last night there was people going, "Oh yeah, I remember meeting you on the water process." It was a whole social.
It's trying to transform people, and that's still there. I agree. Like those people aren't currently on the streets. They're not currently going to street meetings. They're not currently as engaged on social media, the broad mass, as they would have been. But that experience has changed me. Yeah. Like that experience of, Jesus, you can win something. And it's a question of making it clear that if we all come together, for example, on housing, for example, on repeal the 8th, well, we can win on those things too. And then that feeding into other battles. Because water charges, do you remember Aon O'Riordan said the scandalous thing?
just his name made him laugh. Stop. Shut up, you.
You remember he said the scandalous thing about the marriage equality referendum, and he feared that all the anti-water charges protesters were going to vote against marriage equality because they're against the government. And in fact, Jobstown came out and voted over 90% for marriage equality. And I really think that the water charges movement fed into the movement for marriage equality, not in a direct way, but in a sense of people in working class communities were politically engaged.
They were energized.
And it made them easier to have conversations about it and then go out to vote. And then that in turn fed into the next election because people had gone to vote, had a positive experience. did it again. But the water charges also fed into like loads of industrial like worker struggles. If you go to a picket line, there's quite a good chance on Lewis, on Earnode Erin, on Bus Erin, on whatever, you'll meet people who are involved in the water charges because it gave them a sense of power. And that hasn't gone away, and it will be reflected again and again in different things. And like that comes back to the point of that's why they're scared. Well,
I have to say, thanks for coming in, Paul. We could stay chatting all day, but I know you have actual like business to do. You're looking like a watch. So thanks for coming in. We really appreciate this. We knew you weren't going to be Sinister French before you got in here. Just an ordinary guy trying to do an ordinary job. Best of luck going forward. We hope works out. We hope it all works out. We hope a little more cohesion on the left coming up the next election. And it's not going to be long. I mean, once they get to the next budget, Tony's explained this loads of times, there's goodies to be given out and Fine Gael aren't going to get that on their own.
Yeah.
So there's an election on the way and people need to focus more on long-term vision of what's going to happen with Ireland. There's another crash on the way. That's without a doubt. It's going to happen. It's inevitable. That's the cycle.
That's capitalism.
So now is the time to act to try and take some of the pain away from that.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you again for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Cheers, Paul. Thanks for coming in, mate. I want to thank everybody for listening. And if you do think independent listener-led content matters, lads, make sure you subscribe. Do leave us a review. Tell your friends. You can support us from as little as €3 on echochamberpod.com. And we do rely heavily on you guys. We have no budget for this. You got to tell everybody. Keep the show on the road, folks. Thanks a lot.